Someone document all of those predictions, put them in the comments and let us know how right we are.
Bro, have you met adults? Like, I wouldn't trust most of them as far as I can throw them, and I'm not very good at throwing adults.
I think it's obvious in hindsight, but it does show a great deal of ambition, and it's sort of a bit surprising for them to commit to that up front.
Distribution all the way out to the edge, and that edge is the user's body.
You've convinced me. Yes.
It does feel like a pretty heavily inflated bubble.
There will be a correction. The only question is when, how deep, and what are we left with after the dust settles?
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode.
Hi, I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
And I'm Chris Saad.
And in today's episode, we start with an OpenAI roundup. Sam Altman has confirmed that erotic experiences are coming to OpenAI as part of their treat adults like adults policy. An analysis of Johnny Ive's interview with Sam Altman at the Dev Day last week and what he said about the future of OpenAI devices. Chris and I will analyze and break down what that means for the future. Then we're going to talk about Google's AI update. It's been glacial, but does that just mean slow, or does it also mean powerful and inevitable? We're going to talk about the AI bubble. Bloomberg has this amazing diagram showing how all the AI companies are funding each other. When will the music stop? When will the bubble pop? We'll talk about that. And finally, the Oura ring has just raised $900 million at an $11 billion valuation. Find out what this means for the future of AI, data, devices, health, and tech in general. All that and much more right after the break. Today's episode of the Startup Podcast is brought to you by Cyber Matters. Cyber Matters helps startups and scale-ups get security compliance right the first time. Building a startup is hard enough, believe me. Founders do not have months to waste on paperwork, or even worse, dealing with the fallout of bad advice. The team at Cyber Matters run managed GRC programs, internal audits, and risk reviews, all designed to fit how tech companies actually work. From SOC 2 to ISO 27001, they cut through the noise, set up platforms like Drata, and keep you audit ready without slowing you down. Cyber Matters, practical security done properly. Visit cybermatters.io to get started. For our first story today, we wanted to talk about a tweet recently made by Sam Altman. I figured the easiest way to do this in terms of setup, because it's a tweet and pretty short, is just to read it out to you all, and then we can respond to that. So Sam Altman's tweet said this: "We made ChatGPT pretty restrictive to make sure we were being careful with mental health issues. We realized this made it less useful or enjoyable to many users who had no mental health problems, but given the seriousness of the issue, we wanted to get this right. Now that we have been able to mitigate the serious mental health issues and have new tools, we are going to be able to safely relax the restrictions in most cases. In a few weeks, we plan to put out a new version of ChatGPT that allows people to have a personality that behaves more like what people liked about ChatGPT 4.0. We hope it will be better. If you want your ChatGPT to respond in a very human-like way, or use a ton of emoji, or act like a friend, ChatGPT should do it, but only if you want it. In December, as we roll out age gating more fully and as part of our treat adult users like adults principle, we will allow even more, like erotica for verified adults." Well, he buried the lead there, didn't he? What do you think about this one, Chris?
He buried the lead there, didn't he? Actually, in a recent interview, he said we could do a lot of things to maximize engagement, and we're not doing it. And he said, like, for example, adult bots. And
I think there was we're not doing it yet.
Yes. No, look, I have mixed feelings about this. We talked about Tucker Carlson's interview with Sam Altman, where he pressed him on some difficult but simply stated moral quandaries, and how little Sam seemed to be engaged with the facts, or sort of seemed to be making things up as he went along. And as Tucker is wont to do, he kind of expressed alarm about this. There is this very, very difficult confluence of principles and guidelines and guardrails and implementation details that are culturally sensitive, personally sensitive, privately sensitive in terms of the interests of the private enterprise. And it's a very, very, very difficult thing to navigate. On the other hand, Google has managed to present itself as this, sort of arbiter of truth that has no opinions, and you can just Google it and Google will give it to you, and very few people blame Google for what Google returns. That's sort of like, well, that's the open web, and Google is just an impartial kind of mediator of the open web. On the other hand, people expect the LLM to be highly guardrailed and highly opinionated, and sort of protect us against the ills of society. So there's just a lot of stuff going on in and around this topic. I think the right answer here is a combination of what they're actually doing, which is there should be a very clear spec for the principles and guardrails that they are implementing, and they have a version of that. It should have really, really great defaults, and it should have great adult overrides to allow you to make it behave how more or less within some constraints how you want it to behave, short of societal harm, like by making bioweapons or something. And so the idea that you can make your ChatGPT be sarcastic, friendly, erotic, flirty, to the degree that you wanted to answer questions about mental health, or about suicide in terms of, medically assisted suicide or relieving suffering. I think these things for adults are the right thing. I think that the US tends to be quite puritanical about sex and sexual topics, and those are not necessarily the same sensitivities as in Europe or in other countries. And I think it's right that the boundary conditions are less paternalistic than one might, I think, might expect, especially coming, from Australia, where there's a lot of like, well, no, they should protect us from ourselves. I think that the line should be probably a bit further out than I think a typical Australian might want.
Well, look, perhaps I'm a typical Australian. It does make me a bit uncomfortable. And, I'm reading between a few lines here, right? So when Sam talks about treat adult users like adults, and he's talked about some of the safety rails that put in place around mental health or around age gating, the way I would paraphrase his philosophy, and I think this matches what you said, Chris, is if you can take it, you can have it, right? So the idea is these LLMs can do all sorts of stuff. And the safety model is going to be, and increasingly will be, is that there'll be some layer of guardrails that is, in a sense, assessing the end user. It's saying, are you an adult? Do you seem to be showing symptoms of mental ill health or whatnot? If the answer is no, you can kind of have what you want. You can have a sex bot, and you can have like weird conversations, and you can have something that is overly friendly because we think you can take it, right? So I think that's the model. Now, my concern here, Chris, and to your point, maybe this is about the sort of freedom to or freedom from or where the line is. This is very much around exception handling, right? And I do feel, as you alluded to when we discussed it last time, that at least as Sam Altman expresses it, it's pretty simplistic, right? Like this idea is like, either you're an adult or you're not. If you're an adult, you can take it, unless you're mentally ill, which we will somehow determine, and then you can't take it. And I'm like, you know what, there's so much subtle nuance here that just doesn't seem to be coming into the conversation, right? And that the ability of a chatbot to change a person's psychology, or the fact that there are degrees of mental ill health and so on, don't really seem to be coming into it, at least, as described in this tweet.
Yeah, so you're seeing this sort of ability to assess the user's mental health and ability to digest a little more than I am. I'm now sort of seeing the lines where he might be implying that. We have certain tools to determine if, we have new tools to understand serious mental health issues and so on. And so maybe that's one of the qualifiers they're using. Like, for example, YouTube is using an algorithm to detect if you're an adult or not, even whether you declared it or not. And so there's some sort of implicit profiling of the user. But where I disagree with you is, this is almost the opposite of exception handling. With exception handling, you sort of think about there is a clear line, an exception, and there's a clear kind of remediation or boundary condition. This is all a matter of degrees, very, very complicated shades of gray. The kinds of harm are so complicated and subtle, and the interactions between kind of the theory of mind of an artificial intelligence and the theory of mind of you and the theory of mind of society, all mixing together. And so let me just give you an example. I was working with ChatGPT to figure out some very difficult interpersonal relationship issues. And I was saying, like, here's what I did, and here's what they did, and here's how I felt. And this is 4.0, and it was sort of really hyping me up. It was sort of like saying, you're 100% right, they're 100% wrong, and this is absolutely like really terrible. And it was sort of taking me down this rabbit hole of like, like a really great but not very good friend. Like, yeah, yeah. And then I realized, hang on a second, this thing is really fucking me up. I had to change the instructions, and I actually had realized that it was not listening to me over the long term, where I had to say, no, your job is to help me understand the other point of view, to help me understand where I might be going wrong, help me understand how to mediate or bring this back to a middle. And it was like, oh, okay. And then it would kind of forget those instructions and go back to my side after a little while. Again, it was like a very good friend, trying to be on your side. But actually, the best kind of friend is the kind of friend who tells you what your blind spots are. And so this is an area where this could happen with mental health. It could happen with, sort of porn addiction or falling in love with this thing instead of going outside. It could happen when you're maybe being radicalized to the left or the right. These things are very, very subtle. And so I don't think Sam has the answer to this. I don't think I have the answer to this. I don't think an army of ethicists could figure this out. It is the complicated, messy part of being alive. The default is, as Google has managed to get away with for the most part, is treat adults like adults and rely on other, the extreme edge cases. So this is where the exceptions are at the edges, to sort of allow to bump people off certain edges. And then the rest of society, mental health professionals and laws and other techniques to kind of bump you back to where you're at, where you're supposed to be.
I mean, you say treat adults like adults. Sam says treat adults like adults. Like, bro, have you met adults? Like, I wouldn't trust most of them as far as I can throw them, and I'm not very good at throwing adults. Like, that people are vulnerable, right? And the thing is, yes, Google got away with it, and even that was controversial. But the whole point about LLMs is they're 10x, 100x more powerful and more insidious than something like a search engine. And, you say these are complex, ethical, nuanced issues. I think that's true. But when I mentioned exception handling, maybe I wasn't clear what I said. Like, one way you can prevent some of the harms that may be caused is by not allowing the chatbot to do certain things. You can program the chatbot not to provide relationship advice. You can program it not to be erotic. You can program it not to form enduring friendships with an individual. But that's not the direction that OpenAI are going. Instead, they're saying, we're going to try to classify the user and say, if you're a child, you don't get certain things. If you are mentally ill, you don't get certain things. But overall, if we think you can handle it, we will give it to you, right? So in other words, it's exception handling based on the user rather than blanket, I guess,
I understand,
neutering of certain functionality that the agent has.
I understand, but the worst, look, life exists in the middle. Life is about balance for the most part.
Yeah.
And the problem I have many problems with the right. I'm not going to go through them all. The problem with the left is that it tends to infantilize people and try to wrap them in bubble wrap. Yes, I've met people. People are terrible, and they have no common sense, and they're messy, and they can hurt themselves. And that's their prerogative. And I, for one, hate it when I ask ChatGPT a very simple question, and it's like I can feel it deliberately avoiding giving me a specific answer. The other day someone was talking about something about, in the realm of eroticism, and I was like, hey, tell me more about this. And it's like, well, I'd rather not go into that. I'd rather keep the conversation comfortable and light. And I'm like, I'm perfectly comfortable. I'm an adult. I'm asking you a question. Give me the information. Well, I don't want to make this conversation uncomfortable and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, who the fuck is uncomfortable here? Give me the information that I'm asking for that I could easily Google for, right? And so it infuriates the hell out of me. And so, yeah, I, for one, prefer to be treated like an adult. I think everybody else prefers to be treated like an adult. Yes, en masse, this can have some unintended negative consequences, but I would rather bias towards treating people like, free agents with their own sovereignty, rather than bubble wrapping them, and then we sort of see where we have to rein things in.
Yeah, we could continue this debate all day, but let's not. For the sake of our dear listeners, let's move on.
All right, when you say dear listeners, it makes me feel like dear leader. It's like they're our fascist
I'm the dear
kid.
leader. I'm the dear leader. They're the dear listeners.
Got it. All right, the next update we've got is another OpenAI update about Johnny Ive and Sam Altman having a fireside chat during Dev Day. Now, we covered the keynote for Dev Day in the last episode, but there were some side panel side conversations, and I had a chance to watch the one with Johnny Ive and Sam Altman, where they were discussing, Johnny Ive's design philosophy and their collective hopes and dreams for their devices that they're making. And two things struck me as interesting. Johnny Ives is a compelling speaker. He's got the great British accent. He talks with this sort of very deliberative tone, and so it's always fun to watch him talk. You could probably read the dictionary, and I'd be fascinated. But two things that he said specifically about the strategy, the device strategy that they're making. The first was, and this is the first time I'd heard it, is that they're making a family of devices. So there isn't going to be one killer OpenAI device like the Humane Pin or something. It sounds like there's going to be a collection of devices, and that makes a hell of a lot of sense to me. It's one of those things that is obvious in hindsight. I imagine some kind of handheld slate for full attention interaction, something like a mobile device as we know it today. I imagine something like a pair of glasses or a pair of headphones, and whatever else they cook up. And then the second thing that he mentioned, which I thought was cute and interesting and a tension that they're clearly dealing with, he said, I want to make devices that make us happier and calmer. And he sort of joked, very quickly after that, I know I should care about productivity, and I do. and we'll solve for productivity. But really what I want is a device that makes life better, makes the quality of life better. And I, reading between the lines, sort of thinking about his past and what he's been involved in, I can imagine him having some amount of anxiety or regret, or, looking at his work and saying, what, that iPhone, boy, oh boy, it's like a casino slot machine. It beeps and boops and gets us really anxious. And I'd like to find a new kind of modality that is less about that and more about just bringing people what they need only when they need it. So those are two observations I had from the Fireside chat, amongst others. Yaniv, I don't know if you got this chance to see this or what you think about those two particular comments as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting in its vagueness, like you said, very interestingly, nicely spoken, but ultimately it doesn't teach us anything. I mean, yeah, okay, a family of devices perhaps, but I think what he's saying is, if you condense it, is we're going to make devices that are designed to leverage AI to make your life better. And to me, I'm like, well, yes, and respectfully, duh. The question is, how is that going to happen? But where I think there is wisdom in that, it's easy to throw shade, and I'm throwing some, but I guess where there is wisdom in this is that he is doing what a great designer should, which is sitting with the problem and sitting at the intersection of a set of problems and a new enabling technology, right? So instead of saying, hey, we're going to make the OpenAI device, what it sounds like to me is he's thinking, what devices are possible now that I have access to the tools and the corpus of data, the memory that OpenAI increasingly has on hundreds of millions of people? How might I have designed the iPhone differently if I'd been designing it today, right? Maybe the device will end up being a phone. Maybe it'll be a pin. Maybe it'll be something different. But I think the point is, do not presuppose the form factor. Start with what is at the intersection of valuable problems and the ability to solve them in novel ways, and build a device or a family of devices that does that. And, to me, what it sounds like is he hasn't really figured out what that is yet. But I think it is the right way of thinking, right? And that, we've talked about this before, and we've had, of course, Yuki, Chief Product Officer at Figma, on the show, talking about the fact that design is really about sitting with the problems rather than jumping to a solution.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite as no shit as it sounds. I think if this was Satya on stage talking about the new Microsoft device, I think the word productivity would come up about 100 times. If this was Tim Cook, the word beautiful or magic would come up, 100 times. I think if Google was building this device and talking about this device, they wouldn't say the word, but you would see it as a very utilitarian, sort of very pragmatic and useful device. The words calmer and happier are not words I expect from those three companies. If it was from Amazon, it'd be something about buying shit, right? The design goal of making people calmer and happier, I think, is a unique one, is an interesting one. and is one that would lead to a very different conclusion. And I think it's a really worthy or admirable design goal. And especially when, he sort of laughed off the idea that I guess I should say productivity, right? What he's revealing in that sort of moment is there is this tension internally that, this thing needs to be worth something to people, and, people need to buy it to solve a problem. And I can see him sort of wrestling with, yeah, we need to solve problems, but actually I need to solve a much larger, more existential problem that the iPhone created and that technology is creating. And we have this unhealthy tension with these devices now. And I think that's admirable. I think and it'd be interesting to see where that lands. And yeah, and again, the family of devices comment, I think it's obvious in hindsight, but it does show a great deal of ambition. And it's sort of a bit surprising for them to commit to that up front. I would have thought, like, here is a device, let's see how that goes, and then we'll make another variant, and then we'll release a few more. But no, they're committing, like, today, which feels like 6, 12, 24 months from a release of anything real. No, we're going to make a family of them, and we're already exploring multiple form factors. I think that's an interesting decision to make, to commit to that up front, and it speaks to their ambition and their goals.
Allow me to speculate for a moment, Chris. When I think about this. Now, Johnny Ive comes from Apple, and so I think he has the design sensibility of Apple. And like you said, he's less interested in productivity and more interested in humanity and so on. But if you actually think about being positioned within OpenAI, they're a little bit more like Google. And what I mean by that is that they have an existing product. They have an existing ecosystem, right? It is ChatGPT. It is memory around ChatGPT. It's now the ChatGPT apps that we discussed last week, the ecosystem that they're building around that. And when you are an ecosystem player, a software ecosystem player like that, the primary purpose of devices is to avoid being intermediated, right? It's to make sure that you get distribution all the way out to the edge, and that edge is the user's body, right? That it is there in the room with them. And so when you're doing that,
soon it's going to be their brain with neural link.
The brain is in their body, my friend. I'll send you a sketch afterwards. But when you're doing that, it makes more sense to create something more open than Apple. And that's what I'm getting at, right? This is maybe perhaps going to be a bit more like Android than it is going to be like iOS, because what you want to do is maximize that hardware distribution. And so when you think about a family of devices, what I'm starting to wonder, what I'm speculating here is perhaps what they're talking about is building a new way of interacting with the platform that fits into certain types of devices and then releasing reference devices in much the same way that Google has the Pixel line, right? And that makes sense then, if you do it that way, why you would have more than one device, because you might be saying, you can use this new platform this way, or you can use it that way. And there are various natural ways it can fit into people's lives. And we're going to show you the different ways that can be done.
Yeah, if you mean reference devices in the sense that we've discussed in the past, where they're devices that set the low watermark.
Yes, that is what I mean.
Right, because there's Intel reference devices, right, which are prototypey things. And then there are Pixel Surface type devices where they set the low watermark for an ecosystem. And I think it's the latter. These will be highly polished, commercialized products.
Yes.
The other thing that occurs to me just strategically is if these devices are not based on Android, I would be shocked. I would fall off my chair. I think that these things would be underneath based on a flavor of Android. Now, you may never see the Android shell. You may never see the word Android. You may never see a Google app in the entire experience. But I think as a fundamental core operating system or core layer that interacts with hardware, I would imagine Android's going to be in there somewhere. It's not going to be Tizen. It's not going to be something from scratch, I would imagine. I think one of the comments that was in the Fireside chat also was like, maybe an operating system isn't necessary. And then what they mean by that is not, do you need an operating system? Because of course you do. You need to manage the resources on the device and be able to spin up environments and memory management and so on. But do you need an interface that beyond the kind of the chat or the conversation? And do you need 17,000 apps? And I think that's going to be something that I think will go away. So yeah, I think that it will be powered by something established in the world. It would be shocking to me that it would not be Android. And yes, I do think these will be devices that set the low watermark for an ecosystem of devices. I don't know whether that new operating system, that new sort of ChatGPT for devices, I don't know if that will be something that's open source or licensable, though.
No, whether it's open source or not, I mean open in the sense that other companies will be able to make
No,
devices.
right. No, I understand. I don't think I am almost certain it wouldn't be open source, or at least the most important parts of it won't be open source, be on top of the layer of the Android. Whether it's licensed the way Windows is, that's an interesting question.
I think it will be.
Given Johnny Ive's background,
Yeah.
given the complexities of creating an ecosystem, I think it could go either
But
way.
think about the actual industry dynamics, right? Again, when you compare Apple to Google, because it's the perfect example in the case of phones, right? Apple is a hardware company. They make margin. They always made margin, big profits selling every iPhone. And a lot of the ecosystem that they created was to lock people into iPhones so that they could sell more hardware, right? That wasn't a loss leader. It was the product. In a sense, things like iCloud and Apple Maps, they were the loss leaders. They were there to keep you engaged in the Apple ecosystem. Whereas Google, they have search and ads and maps and all of this stuff, which are these immensely lucrative products. And what they want to avoid is having to pay tax to someone like Apple, right? They don't want to be intermediated. So they give away Android for free. They might sell their phones at cost or even at a loss to make sure that people are locked into the Google ecosystem. Now, which of those is OpenAI more like? It is more like Google. They have the ChatGPT universe. They want as many people using ChatGPT as often as possible, all the time. And for that, you want maximum distribution.
Yes, you've convinced me. Yes. OpenAI is a developer-first company. They want ChatGPT. They want intelligence in the cloud powered by them everywhere, always, all the time. These devices are, as you said, going to be reference devices for how to build a great AI device and probably build a ChatGPT for devices. And they're going to want that, not just reference device, but reference implementation of ChatGPT intelligence out there. And that, yes, I agree with you. I think they're going to want a series of certified ChatGPT for devices out in the world, and they're going to want them in all flavors and colors of the rainbow. I think you're right. I think you're right on that.
And I think where Apple's sensibility might come in, where Johnny Ive might come in, is it might be quite a strict licensing approach, to your point, that they'll have to certify devices rather than saying, hey, just do whatever you want. But
yes, I think it'll be somewhere between Google and Apple. It'll be a highly curated devices ecosystem.
But it won't only be OpenAI devices.
That's what I would do. OpenAI certified using ChatGPT for devices, like whatever that OS is called. It's an Android variant, if I had to bet money. Probably without the standard Android interface and, icons, the grid of icons, something more sort of self-generative than that and more conversational than that. Yeah. I think that's roughly right. Look at it. Clip this part, hold us accountable, see if our predictions come true in 12 or 24 months. Let's see what happens.
36 or 48 months.
Or 48.
Let's see how quickly Johnny Ive moves.
No, I think they need to be moving very fast. I think if this takes more than 12 months, I'd be surprised as well. Someone document all of those predictions and put them in the comments and let us know how right we are and when this all comes together. Are our predictions correct? What do you predict is going to happen? And do you think it's going to be a success? Let us know down in the comments below.
Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is to move on to Google and talk about their slow-moving AI glacier that is sort of gathering everything up in its path and I think is starting to look really powerful. So a couple of medium-sized announcements from Google, but I think are starting to sort of show what's happening here. So the first is that they have built a Gemini-powered scheduling assistant right into Gmail, meaning if you're starting to type an email and it's clearly an email thread about finding a time to have a meeting, then Gemini will actually hook into Google Calendar and make it possible to schedule the meeting from right within your email thread. And this is the sort of stuff, and we talked about it just last week or the week before, Chris, that Google is traditionally really bad at, and it has still been pretty bad at with the AI stuff so far, right? Which is to say, they've got this immense ecosystem where you could use AI as the glue to leverage all of these things and make them more powerful together. And it tends to do a pretty bad job of that. But this is an example of, okay, they started off doing a bad job. Like, the AI sidebar in Google Docs still cannot edit the doc, which is insane. But we're starting to see these wheels turning. And it feels, like I said, like a glacier, like slow moving, but inevitable. Another, again, medium-sized announcement is that Google's AI mode in search, which is when the search becomes more like a chatbot, has been in the US for quite a few months now. It's now rolled out to dozens more countries and is effectively a global feature. So you can see that point by point by point, Google has this massive distribution advantage combined with being a frontier leader in the AI technology. And they get multiple swings. They get multiple bites at the cherry here. They can screw it up and screw it up. But as long as at some point they start getting some things right, and I think these bits of news are showing that they are starting to get it right, they're in a really powerful position.
Yeah, you said the word glacial a couple of times. It really does feel glacial and sort of bizarrely bad. I'm looking at this animated GIF of this feature that they've released. Like, wow, it's Calendly. You just like press a button and it inserts a static kind of set of calendar suggestions into your email body.
But that's exactly my point, Chris. Is it's like guys like Calendly have only been able to thrive because Google has been so bad at this. They don't have to kick ass to win. It's the same way that Teams beats Slack, right?
No, I understand. I'm saying that I'm not saying they're going to lose because of this. I'm not saying that it's a problem for them. I'm saying if I was the product managers at Google, I'd be embarrassed. Like what this feature should be is, insert a live, for scheduling chat to my assistant. And it's like a real-time thing where, and then on the other side, the person who receives it can connect their calendar and it helps them automatically schedule free busy time. Or, this is literally just inserting a static set of calendar events that'll quickly expire when your calendar fills up. It seems so dumb. You mentioned document editing. Yeah, absolutely ridiculous that the Gemini can't edit the documents. What seems worse, because editing documents, maybe that takes a bit of taste and judgment and whatever. What's worse is that Gemini in Gmail is junk. Like I ask it questions about my relationship with someone, my conversation thread, find evidence that we discussed this, and this, and it just sort of like, it doesn't do a very good job at all. It's basically a glorified search engine. Whereas it could be using the corpus of my email as a knowledge base to do what OpenAI does, which is use it as a deep research surface for my work. And it just doesn't do that. And so, yeah, I think Google, they've got time. They keep coming back at, trying again and trying again. But how long are we into this? We're 2.5 years into this process. Applying your LLM over Gmail is not complicated. Having a little chatbot where you can connect your calendar and their calendar and have it, be an assistant to help you find some scheduling. It's not complicated. It's not complicated. And so I don't know what they're waiting for.
I mean, I guess it is when you have 2 billion users, I'd say would be their defense.
Whatevs. Give me a break. You got all the capacity of Google Cloud. You've got all of the engineers of the Google engineering team. You've got one of the best frontier models in the history of the world. Like, come on, guys, wire it up. Let's go.
Chris says, ship it.
Ship it.
Well, what do you guys think? Do you think Google is finally getting its shit together on AI, or are they still moving at that glacial pace?
All right, join us in the comments and let us know.
Scaling fast? Congratulations! Do not let compliance trip you up. Cyber Matters makes GRC simple. Policies, audits, and risk management built for real companies, not tick box exercises. Go to cybermatters.io to learn more. That's cybermatters.io.
Hey, before we get back into the show, a quick reminder. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications and spread the word about the podcast. It helps us grow the show, which in turn helps us help more founders like you. Thanks so much. Okay, with that, back to the show. The next topic is an industry update for something that is dawning on people. I've seen this come up in a few different places in a few different ways, but Bloomberg in the last week has published a map of the AI money loop. This idea that OpenAI is buying NVIDIA chips, NVIDIA is investing in OpenAI, Oracle rents NVIDIA chips to OpenAI, OpenAI gets equity in AMD. There's this sort of loop of money where these companies are investing in each other, and then they're taking that money and then they're spending it on the products of the investor, and it sort of goes round and around and around. And the hypothesis being, or the accusation being, that this is sort of a giant hot air balloon that is self-inflating. And when the printing machine stops, or when the exuberance ends, the music stops. There will be some people left without a chair, and the bubble will pop. Now, you marry that up with, Sam Altman and Jeff Bezos and others admitting, yeah, it's a bubble. The history is replete with bubbles and trying to draw distinctions between industrial bubbles and financial bubbles. And financial bubbles are just pure financial engineering, but industrial bubbles will leave the world with better tools. And it's a bubble, but there's always wasted investments here and there. But ultimately, the core of this is very, very powerful. And so there is a general sense, a general admission from everybody. Things are overheated, overinflated, and there will be a correction. The only question is when and how deep, and what are we left with after the dust settles? So, Yaniv, you've seen this Bloomberg diagram.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard the comments that leaders in the industry admitting, yeah, it's probably a bit bubbly. What do you make of this? Is it just a little frothy, or is this going to pop hard like the dot-com bubble and take years or decades to fully recover?
It does feel like a pretty heavily inflated bubble at this point, Chris, and it's kind of scary, right? So, yeah, I mean, some of this stuff, it's becoming financial engineering. NVIDIA and OpenAI are guilty of some really weird shit in terms of the financial engineering. I think especially OpenAI, all roads do kind of lead back to them. So they've committed to buying, at this point, forward contracts, several $trillion worth of GPUs and associated infrastructure from people like Oracle and AMD and so on. The only problem is they don't have trillions of dollars, right? But what happens is by having these contracts in place, they pump up the stock prices of these other companies, and then these other companies are able to raise more money. And then there's this hope that, like, with so much money just entering, it'll keep the ball in the air, right? But there are deals with AMD where it's like stock changes hands, and then NVIDIA is also doing what's called vendor financing, where they're basically lending money to the people who are buying their chips so that they have the money to buy their chips. And of course, that then juices their balance sheet. They're like, hey, we're selling more chips. And then the stock price goes up, and then they can do the next round of vendor financing, right? And so it's got all of these sort of cyclical things where these sort of bubble inflating aspects to it that are pretty scary. And, what you really need to hope, and increasingly the only hope is like some form of AGI, is that at some point the amount of value being generated by AI catches up to all of these valuations, to all of these infrastructure investments. I read the other day that basically all of the GDP growth in the US, like whatever it is, like 1.8% or something, nearly all of it can be attributed to build outs of AI data centers. If you take that out, the economy is basically in recession. And so this is becoming a really huge industry. And that's the thing to remember. It's not just NVIDIA and OpenAI. It's all the traders, the HVAC workers, the construction managers, the engineers building giant data centers, the electricity companies, people building transmission lines. It's this huge industrial project. And yes, it's an industrial bubble, not just a purely financial bubble, but it doesn't mean it won't pop, right? And I did listen to a podcast not that long ago comparing this to the railway bubble in the United States. And the railroad bubble did, I believe, at its peak, absorbed 6% of US GDP. So like triple what the AI bubble currently is doing. And yes, it did leave the United States with a massive railroad network that advanced a lot of things in the economy. It also left the US economy with 2 depressions and a whole lot of railway track that went from nowhere to nowhere and made no sense and just had to be ripped up again. So it's a very wasteful enterprise. And so, that argument says, well, will the economy be better off in the long term for this bubble? I think yes, in the same way the railroads were a revolution, in the same way the web was a revolution. But damn, if you're holding the bag when the bubble bursts, it's pretty cold comfort. And so, yeah, it's getting kind of scary out there.
Yeah, look, I don't know if there's anything original left to say about this whole bubble, not bubble topic. You sort of said if you take out the AI, revolution, the economy's in a recession. It's sort of like saying if you take out the industrial revolution, the economy at the time was in a recession. It's like Yeah, if you take out the most important thing going on right now, then the economy isn't that interesting. That's because the entire economy has pivoted to do this thing, and it's an important thing. And the economy is driven by these kinds of big Cambrian explosions of value creation. And so, on one hand, I'm like, yeah, it is holding up the economy, but the economy is often driven by these bursts of activity, innovation, and doubling down on stuff. We've talked to death about this idea of like, if AGI is real, or if even generative AI can live up to the hype, to forget AGI, then the upside is potentially infinite, And we've also talked, and everyone's talked ad infinitum about this idea that every boom has its bust, and every bust leaves behind some amount of track, some amount of dark fiber, some amount of internet infrastructure that eventually becomes the Amazons and the Yahoos and the whatever. So look, it's all been discussed to death. As it relates to this particular thing, is this pure financial engineering? Is this pure just sort of inflationary game of musical chairs? I don't know that I'd be doing anything different in their position. If I was NVIDIA and I had the picks and shovels for the gold rush, I'd be wanting to take an equity stake in the prospectors. If I was the prospectors, I needed to bootstrap my supply of picks and shovels, I would want to cut a deal with the picks and shovels manufacturer, give them a piece of the upside so that I can get access to the materials up front for a lower cost basis.
But I guess the analogy works, but here's the problem, right? The question is how much gold is being pulled out of the ground, right? Like that's what makes it potentially a bubble, right?
That's like the only
it's
question.
About the value. And that's why I said, it sort of nearly requires AGI, because if you look at the scale of investment that is going into this thing, the only thing that provides a legitimate return on this much investment is an absolute fucking tsunami of gold, right? It's not just like, oh, we've got a pretty solid gold mine happening here. We've got to hit the mother lode now, and that's what makes it feel like a bubble.
What it requires, I think, is two things. It requires an internet scale or mobile era scale revelation or revolution of the economy, and it requires to skip over the internet scale trough of disillusionment that occurred in the .com era. Yeah. So, right, it doesn't need to be AGI. It just needs to be the kind of disruption that the internet or mobile devices created, which is decades-long transformational change, and skipping the trough part for this bubble to not pop. As I said before, my money is where my mouth is. I am heavily invested in the Magnificent Seven, thinking where most of the value is going to accrue there. If there is a major correction, I will feel it.
Yes, you will.
I will feel it hard, right? And so I am sitting there looking at the numbers going, hey, when do I want to exit this thing? Or I need to set some stop losses or whatever. But I also am an optimist about technology. I have a long time horizon. I'm not retiring fully anytime soon. And so I'm willing to ride this out because I do think this will be fundamentally transformative. I do have, and listeners, you've heard me express some amount of skepticism about there's some diminishing returns here. ChatGPT 5 isn't as revelatory as we'd like. I'm seeing the sort of the dumbness, the lack of intuition in these models, and it doesn't seem to be getting vacuumed out, fully. I'm seeing the limitations of memory and instructions. There is something asymptoting here, but the same could have been said for Moore's law until they found the next architecture, the next nanometer, the next whatever. And so, we will wait and see, and we'll see what happens. All right. Well, those are our thoughts. What do you guys think? Is this pure financial engineering that they're just sort of pumping up their valuations? Or do you think this is basic mechanics when you're in a gold rush? And when do you think the music might stop playing and people will run out of seats? Let us know in the comments below. Speaking of crazy valuations, Yaniv, there has been another major fundraise.
Yes. So Oura, the maker of the smart biometric rings, have just raised $900 million at an $11 billion valuation, which is a doubling of its valuation from not that long ago, from last December. So less than a year, doubling the valuation to over $11 billion. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about this one, Chris, is because I feel like it's at the confluence of a couple of interesting trends that touch large parts of the industry. And of course, one of those is AI. we've talked quite recently about the fact that in AI, increasingly, the moat, the competitive advantage you can have is data, right? And if you think about all the discussions from OpenAI's Dev Day and so on, what is their big advantage? It's not really having the best models anymore. That was last year's vector of competition, right? Now it's like, who's got the most users with the most memory and the most integrations? Who knows the most about you so they can give you customized, tailored responses? And OpenAI has been playing that game. But what is Oura? Oura is a sensor bundle that is strapped onto your finger and is with you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and becomes increasingly powerful and knows more and more about you and your health. And so it makes sense to me that as part of a general AI bubble, to segue this from the previous conversation, Chris, that something like Oura has over 5 million devices now on people's fingers, is collecting an absolute treasure trove. And you can imagine that as predictive health and preventative health becomes a bigger and bigger deal, this treasure trove of data becomes increasingly valuable as well. So I think that's one trend. And then the other is actually about distribution, which we've also touched on lately. Preventative health is a big trend. It's especially a big trend in Silicon Valley with a lot of tech bros and so on having their blood boys and their DEXA scans and their preventative blood panels and all of that, right? This idea of extending life, extending health span through spending money on tech through the quantified self, right? And you've got companies like Superpower and
Function Health.
Yeah, like Superpower and Function that are trying to take advantage of that. But I actually think Oura are in a much more interesting position. And they, as part of this announcement, not that long ago, they started selling health panels. So a blood test for $99. And to me, they're in a much stronger position than somebody who's selling the blood panels. They're saying, hey, we've got this device on your finger. It is with you all the time. It is learning about you. And when the time is right, we can say, hey, look, your heart rate has been a bit elevated these last few weeks, or you haven't been getting as much exercise. Maybe you should get a blood panel. How have you been feeling? And so on. And the fact that they have that end-to-end user distribution puts them in such a strong position. And so if I were to put, again, my sort of crystal ball on and say, what is the future of this preventative health world going to be? It is going to be owned by the companies that are selling the physical devices and are then able to upsell and cross-sell to all of the services alongside that. Not the services company that are going to have a hell of a job acquiring customers as time passes. So that's my prediction. And again, going back to OpenAI's hardware device, a discussion with Johnny Ive, all of these things, you see these same trends repeating themselves, echoing each other, right? Distribution is king and data is king. And this Oura raise, I think, it just wraps both of these trends up in a nice little bow and says, here's your $900 million raise off the back of these two massive advantages that Oura have.
Yeah, a couple of things on this. You mentioned sort of the tech bros and they're, blowing crap loads of money on their quantified self. Look, there are two silver bullets for society: education and health, right?
Yep.
Without education, without health, everything else is irrelevant. And so, yes, the tech bros are ahead of the curve, and yes, they have the disposable income to take care of themselves. But this should be standard fare for society. I've worked in the medical, medtech, biotech world for a long time now. It's actually verging on years, which is a bit surprising to me, from cannabis to microbiome to other things. What strikes me is the slow pace of adoption and regulatory hurdles to deliver any kind of innovation. And this feeling from a lot of doctors, well, firstly, the fact that a lot of doctors are highly siloed and specialized and don't look at the body as a holistic system. And this idea that there is such a thing as over-testing and too much data. All of those things are fucking stupid. They're just dumb. Straight up,
Tell
full
us what
stop.
you really think.
I always do, right? You cannot have too much data about your body. You cannot test too much. And the patient should be at the center of their care. And the body is a system of interrelated systems. And you must look at the whole system as a whole. And so, and when you take drugs, you create unintended consequences, which you need to understand, at least. I'm not advocating against drugs, or I'm not railing against pharma here. Those things are amazing. What I'm saying is it needs to be taken as a whole. And any device or company, whether it's a function which allows you to test a lot and cheaply and to understand your whole, the functioning of your entire system, or whether it's Oura Ring, which allows you to monitor in real time, or Fitbit or whatever, I think these things are goddamn amazing. And with Fitbit as one of the major independent device manufacturers off the table, now owned by Google, I guess Oura is the next major independent health device manufacturer. And that is a very, very powerful place to be. They're very well trusted. They're perceived to be accurate and useful. They've got a great supply chain, a great brand. Perhaps the only other company that's coming close that pops into my mind right now is the Whoop, which I think is a lot smaller, but enjoyed by a real sort of diehard collection of people. And so, yeah, it makes sense that the number one and number two players in the independent space, not Apple, not Google, not whatever, Amazon, and Microsoft, that makes a lot of sense that these guys are very, very important. At the very best, they become the next generation healthcare companies. At the very worst, they get acquired for an absolute crap ton of money from the next major kind of hyperscaler acquisition to catch up and keep up with the Fitbits and Apple Watches of the world. So yeah, very, very, very cool.
I just wanted to once again emphasize the genius of a business model where you get people to pay you in order to install a sensor bundle on their finger that you can then use the data from to upsell them to other services, because that's what we're talking about here. And that's why, when you think about business models, it's really fascinating. And like I said, I actually think Oura is a great lesson in how to leverage some of the natural advantages of this sort of tech.
That is what we're talking about. If you're a grumpy old man who wants to be extremely reductive, yes, we're talking about that. But
no, I'm not being grumpy. I'm saying it's fucking genius.
Yeah, but it's like, put a sensor on your hand and pay money to put it. Yes, that is the kind of the moving parts of it all. But people are paying to improve the quality of their lives, and
yeah,
this is incredible tech. It's awesome. It's good stuff.
It is good stuff. We love you. If you'd like to share any of that $900 million, we are looking for sponsors.
We keep shitting on and criticizing every company in the world. None of them are going to sponsor us. When I used to do radio way back in the day, and we used to make fun of this thing and that thing, and we'd always joke, there goes that sponsorship deal. We don't do that on the show, but we should, because it does make our lives harder, I imagine.
It's like joking, not joking. Yeah.
Speaking of which, if you'd like to sponsor the show, we're looking for sponsors. Let us know. Mm-hmm. Drop us a line. We would love to hear from you. Reach out to you.
Especially if we haven't shat on you yet, then that's called synergy.
But hey, what better way to show that you are, an independent company who appreciates independent creators by sponsoring us despite our criticism of your company?
Yeah, that was convincing.
All right, Yaniv. Well, I think that is the pod. Thanks for joining me as always. How can people find you on the internet?
I'm on LinkedIn trying to make it less boring. So come hit me up. I love getting connection requests from TSP listeners. Let me know that's where you come from, and I will accept your request. How about you, Chris?
Especially if you're a sponsor. You can find me on all the social media at Chris Saad, and especially LinkedIn, or subscribe to my newsletter at chrissaad.com/newsletter. All right, guys. We'll catch you in the next one.
All right. That was fun. See you, Chris.
Bye-bye.
This episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Cyber Matters. Startup security doesn't need to be painful. Cyber Matters runs complex compliance programs that keep you audit ready and focused on growth. Check out cybermatters.io to learn more. That's cybermatters.io.